Following the finding of his wife's death in a bathtub following her suicide, Dr. David Callaway, a psychologist in New York City, chooses to relocate with his 10-year-old daughter Emily to upstate New York. Emily meets a seemingly fictitious buddy she refers to as Charlie. Her association with Charlie starts to bother David when he discovers their cat dead in the bathtub, who Emily believes was a victim of Charlie. Meanwhile, David has dreams about the New Year's Eve party that occurred the night before his wife died. When a family friend called Catherine pays a visit to David and Emily, Emily discloses that she and Charlie share a desire to upset her father. Soon, they meet their neighbors, a guy and a woman. David is concerned by their strange interest in Emily. He subsequently realizes that the reason for this is because the couple had a daughter who died from cancer and resembled Emily. Later, when David pays a visit to the widow, she anxiously and ambiguously hints that her husband has begun emotionally and maybe physically assaulting her in response to the death of their child. David meets a local woman called Elizabeth and her niece, Amy, who is about Emily's age. David arranges for Emily to have a playdate in the hopes of cultivating a new, healthy bond. Amy is eager to make friends right away, but Emily spoils the playdate by cutting Amy's doll's face. After Amy leaves the house, Emily informs David that she doesn't need any more pals. Despite the disastrous playdate, David and Elizabeth hit it off. David invites her to dinner one night, and Emily becomes increasingly angry towards her. Elizabeth subsequently pays a visit to the house, seeking to reconcile with Emily. When Emily tells her she's playing hide-and-seek with Charlie, Elizabeth indulges her by pretending to look for him. When Elizabeth unlocks the closet, someone jumps out and throws her out a second-story window, killing her. When the police discover her car crashed near David's house, David asks Emily what happened. Emily alleges Charlie killed her by pushing her out of her wind, and she informs David where her body is. A frightened David discovers Elizabeth's body in the bathroom, in a blood-soaked bathtub. When David asks Emily where Charlie is, Emily responds that Charlie has just left. David walks outside, armed with a knife, and meets the neighbor who has become friends with Emily. David believes that his neighbor is Charlie and begins to be hostile. The neighbor, suspecting that David has murdered his own daughter, begs to see Emily, but David slashes him with his knife. The neighbor then phones the cops. Back at home, David discovers that, despite having spent many hours in his study, listening to music and writing in his diary, the boxes were never unpacked following the transfer. With this, David recognizes he has a split personality and that Charlie is not a fictitious character, but rather David himself. Whenever Charlie appeared, David was in his study. Charlie was genuinely in charge. David also discovers that, under his Charlie identity, he murdered his wife and said it was a suicide. He also vividly remembers the events of the New Year's Eve party the night before his wife died. David observed his wife leave as soon as the countdown to midnight ended. He followed her and discovered her having sex in a stairway with another visitor. Charlie was constructed to channel David's fury toward his wife, something the placid David was too polite to accomplish. Emily was aware of her father's dual personality the entire time, but she chose not to inform him so as not to frighten him out. When David discovers Charlie's name and awful actions, he becomes entirely obsessed by Charlie, killing the local sheriff who arrives to investigate the prior altercation. Emily phones Catherine for assistance. Catherine comes, and Charlie pushes her down the basement steps. Charlie/David, determined to play another hide-and-seek game with Emily, begins to count. Emily rushes and hides. She deceives Charlie and manages to lock herself in her room. As Charlie attempts to get in, she climbs out the window and flees into the cave where she first met Charlie. Meanwhile, Catherine steals the revolver from the deceased sheriff, escapes the cellar, and finds Charlie searching for Emily in the cave. Charlie poses as David and assaults Catherine when she lets down her guard. Catherine asks David to come out and confront his homicidal other nature. Charlie informs Catherine that David no longer lives, and that the moment David realized the truth about himself, Charlie was able to completely take control. Emily appears from her hiding place and begs Charlie to let Catherine go. Her distraction allows Catherine to shoot Charlie, eventually murdering him. Later, Emily is getting ready for school in her new life with Catherine. However, Emily's drawing of herself with Catherine shows two heads, implying that as a result of witnessing what happened to her father, Emily now suffers from split personality.